everyone. In this video I'm going to demonstrate how to replace the AC compressor in my 2008 Dodge Ram 1500. As you can see, this truck has the 5.7 liter Hemi engine, but I believe this process should be pretty standard across the third generation Ram trucks. The reason I'm doing this is because my compressor has completely locked up. Earlier this summer, when the temperature started rising, the first time I turned on the AC, I smelled something hot from inside the cab, so I immediately parked the vehicle, jumped out, and came to look under the hood, and could see that the AC compressor pulley was not turning at all. So the compressor is right here, and it has a magnetic clutch here. When you press the AC button inside, this clutch will engage and lock together with the pulley, which would normally be just spinning freely with the AC system off. When you press the button for AC to engage, this electromagnetic clutch here pulls tight against the pulley and basically engages the compressor pulley with the drive belt, which in turn spins the compressor fins inside the compressor. Well, when the compressor locks up, this pulley can't turn, and so my serpentine belt was basically slipping across the stationary pulley excuse me, and it was causing the belt to smoke. So I haven't been able to use my AC to this point of the summer, so I finally found some time to go ahead and replace it. Now, I'm also, during this process, I'm also going to replace the AC condenser coil, which is right here, located on the passenger side of your radiator, which is here. I'm going to replace this. I'm also going to replace the accumulator dryer, which is here, and the refrigerant line coming from the evaporator coil in the dash, which I believe houses the orifice tube. Now, you might ask, why replace all these components if the only thing that went bad is the compressor? And while I'm not an AC tech, my understanding is that the compressor failure can send debris and shards of metal into the system, and the very first place those pieces of debris would migrate to would be through this refrigerant line into the condenser coil, which has really small tubes that the refrigerant flows through. So if you've got debris in the line, it's going to probably get into your condenser and plug that up. Also, same thing holds true for the orifice tube, which is what allows the refrigerant to change from a high pressure to low pressure state. That's what provides your cooling. So you don't want any debris in that. And then anytime you open the AC system, it's good practice to replace the dryer. Once you open the system to the atmosphere, you get humidity and moisture in the system and in the dryer, and that is an enemy to the AC system. Any moisture in the system or air is going to make the system less efficient and could be a failure, cause for failure. So it's good practice to replace this. It's not super expensive. I bought a kit with all these components included from rockauto.com, and I think I paid something like $285, which is a pretty good price, I felt like. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do, well, first things first, you want to disconnect your battery. I've gone ahead and just completely removed my battery so that I can use the battery tray as sort of a parts and tool bin. The next thing I want to do is go ahead and remove the serpentine belt so that we can get the compressor off. So let me grab a couple of tools and we will move on to that. Okay, I'm getting ready to remove the serpentine belt now, but I realized I forgot to mention one very important thing in the first segment, and that is that you don't want to just go tearing into your AC system with refrigerant still in the lines. You want to make sure that you have this evacuated properly, which is not something that most people have the ability to do at home. You need to have the right equipment to do that. So I went ahead and took this to a local shop and had the refrigerant recovered. They only charged me $45 for it, so that's kind of a no-brainer. And you know, that serves two purposes. One, it protects the environment, so you're not evacuating refrigerant into the atmosphere, and number two, it keeps you safe. You don't want high pressure refrigerant shooting out and causing injury to you. So make sure you have this, if you're going to do this repair, make sure you have the refrigerant professionally recovered first, which I've already done. I have no pressure in any of my lines, so the system is safe to work on now. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that. It goes without saying, but it's definitely important. So anyway, let's move along. As you can see, I've got a socket wrench in place here, and what we need to do is insert it into the square notch in the belt tensioner pulley, which is right here. There's actually a 3/8 square hole in here that receives a 3/8 drive socket wrench, and you're just going to turn clockwise, and you can see it rotates the tensioner pulley and takes the tension off the serpentine belt. So then you can grab the belt with your other hand and pull it off. Just make sure you take note of the belt routing. You don't want to put the belt on incorrectly later, because it could rotate parts in the wrong direction. So make sure you pay attention to the way the belt's routed. I usually take photos from several vantage points to make sure that I know exactly how it goes back. Your truck may have a decal on the front with a picture of the belt routing. My truck does not. I know that my earlier model 2001 second gen Ram does, but I'm not sure about many of the third gens. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get this serpentine belt out of here, and then we'll move along. Okay, I've gotten the serpentine belt removed, and the next thing I'm going to do is remove the air filter housing. And I think I'm eventually going to have to remove this bracket here so that I can get better access to the refrigerant line that runs back here. I believe there's a coupling in the line somewhere behind that bracket or somewhere near it. So to do that, you simply need to loosen a 5/16 nut here, which I've already done. That relieves the tension on that ring clamp on this hose, air intake hose. There's also a breather line that goes back to the oil filler here. It has a spring clamp on it that I've removed, so that'll just slide off. And then there's a series of clips on the air intake housing itself, two on the side facing the passenger fender well, and then there should be one on the front and one on the back. My truck's actually missing these, but these simply pull backwards like that. And this, if you look at the back side, it's kind of hinged. There's a plastic tab that fits into a slot here and back there by my finger. So when you lift it, you want to kind of rock it up like that. You just need to work this loose. There we go. Now that entire thing can come out, and we can set it aside, and we can figure out how to get the lower section and the bracket out. Let me investigate a little bit and I'll be right back. Alright, the lower half of the air filter housing actually just kind of rests in place. These little posts here fit through the hole in the rubber grommet, and it simply slides up off of those. So if you lift up, the entire thing will come out. You can pull it out of place. And now we need to work on the bracket. Looks like there's at least 2 bolts, and I'm not sure if there's anything else down here. I'm going to work on removing those bolts next, and then we'll see what happens. Okay, I've removed the 2 13mm bolts that hold the brackets to the body here. One here, one here. And what I like to do is I remove things is just put them in little plastic baggies and tag them with what they are in bolt size, so when I go to put things back together, it just makes it easier to grab the right socket. And then I typically would just throw them over there and let them pile up as I move along. Certainly you can develop your own system. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Just as long as you know where everything goes back, then you're going to be good. Unfortunately, the bracket is still in there pretty good, and I have a bad feeling that I'm going to end up having to remove the wheel well liner from the passenger side. It feels like there's probably some other connectors under there that are being concealed by this, so I think I'm probably going to have to take this out. I'm going to do a little bit more digging, and then I'll report back with what I find out. Alright, after feeling around under that air filter housing bracket, it definitely feels like there's a couple of bolts attached from the underside that I'm only going to be able to get to probably if I remove this wheel well lining. This is on the passenger side of the vehicle, front right tire or front right wheel well. So there's a series of 5/16 screws or bolts. 1, 2, 3, I think at least 2, if not all 3 of them, of those actually connect into the bottom of the air filter housing mounting bracket. And then there's going to be another few around the wheel well. I've got 4 or 5, you can see, and then there's another back here just behind the upper control arm right there. So I'm going to remove those, and I'll probably have to take the mud flap off too. I think this screw probably, or these 3 screws hold the mud flap and the wheel well liner. So I'm going to remove all those and see if that won't release the liner, and then we'll see if we can get to the underside of that mounting bracket up there. Be right back. Okay, so I've removed all those screws, and in hindsight I probably could have left the lower ones, because it looks like I can actually just peel this down and expose the 2 bolts. So there's a 13mm here and a 13mm there, and that should release this entire bracket assembly so that we can get to the AC line which runs behind it. So let me get those 2 bolts out of the way, and we'll see if we can't get that out of the car or out of the truck. Be right back. Alright, as you can see, the air filter housing mounting bracket is now free. We can remove it, and that exposes the refrigerant line that we will eventually need to replace. It runs all the way back to the evaporator core inside the dash, and there's a coupling right here. So eventually we'll take that apart and remove that section of line. For now I'm going to leave it, and I think I'm going to work on removing the compressor. So the first thing we need to do is disconnect the electrical connections, of which there are 2, I believe. There's one here, which is, I think, is probably the pressure switch. So it looks like you have to squeeze that. I'm probably going to need 2 hands for this. That should be a squeeze connection, and then the actual switch for the clutch has a safety mechanism here. If you push that up with your thumb like that, then you can squeeze on this half and separate the connectors. I'll need 2 hands for that one as well, but that's how those come off. Then we need to unbolt the refrigerant lines. Let me get the electrical connections removed, and then we'll work on the line connections. Alright, so I've got this connection removed. This one, I realize you actually have, see this little tab right there? You actually have to push that down like that, and that slides off. Real easy. Alright, so now on to the refrigerant lines. Alright, so now that the electrical is disconnected, we can remove the refrigerant lines. Again, there's a nut here and a nut here. This one I've already removed. These are 1/2 inch. Once you pull those off, then you can lift these lines straight up. You'll see there's a gasket as well as an O-ring on the fitting, and we'll need to replace those before we put the new compressor in. So I can finish unscrewing this. Careful not to drop these because there's all kinds of nooks and crannies they could fall into. So same thing here, gasket and O-ring. We'll set that off to the side for now. Now we can work on the compressor itself. So first things first, I think we need to remove this bracket right here, which appears to have a series of 3 nuts and 1 bolt. I'll figure out the size of these and we'll remove those. And that should expose another bolt there that goes through the compressor. And there's another one here that we can already get to. So let me figure out the sizes of all those and we'll get them out of there. Okay, so I've got those 3 nuts and 1 bolt removed. They are all 13 millimeter. That frees up this bracket. Now we can slide that off and set that aside. And that exposes this nut here. And like I said, this one here is already, this bolt is already exposed. I believe both of those are going to be 15 millimeter. So we need to remove those, and then we should be able to lift the old compressor straight out. So let me pull those and see what happens. Okay, I've gotten both of those loose. This side actually ended up being a bolt with a stud on the end of it. So both this side and this side are loose and removed. I can slide them out, but the compressor still won't come out because I realized on the back side there appears to be a 3rd bolt right there. That is a 13 millimeter. So I'm going to remove that, and then that should finally release the compressor to come out of the vehicle. So on to that next. Okay, I've got the 13 millimeter bolt removed from behind the compressor, and it is free, but it's kind of tight, and I think that's because the compressor itself actually kind of pinches this mounting bracket, front and back. So it's kind of tight. So what I have been doing is I stuck my long pry bar in here and just have been gently prying up like that. There we go, I've got it broken free now. So if I'm strong enough, there we go, I can fully remove it from the vehicle. Alright, so that part's out of the way. Now I guess it's time to fiddle with the accumulator back here. Actually, you know what, I think I'm going to leave that for last. I think I'm going to tackle the condenser next because I think that's going to be more of a pain in the neck. So let me regroup here, let me study how this is installed and get a game plan. I'll be right back. Okay, so to get the condenser out, it looks like it's a little tricky, but the first step, and probably the easiest, is to disconnect the refrigerant lines. So there's one connection here, this is a 1/2-inch bolt, and then there's another at the back. It's another 1/2-inch bolt, so I'm going to remove those. And then I forgot to mention, I'm going to tape off the ends of my lines. You can see I put a piece of duct tape over the lines that we removed from the compressor. It's not going to keep atmosphere out, but it'll keep any debris from accidentally getting in there. And of course, before we get the system recharged, the technician will pull a vacuum on the system to evacuate any condensation. But I just want to keep debris out of the lines. So I'm going to remove these, tape off the ends. This hose at that point will completely come out. We'll set it aside. You can see I've labeled it self-explanatory, but I just want to make sure I know exactly where it goes. And then we're going to have to figure out how to eventually separate the condenser here from the fan housing that goes behind it. And I think I've read 2 different approaches. Some folks say it's best to remove the battery box and the fuse box here and slide it out of the way so you can rock everything back this way to separate. I've also read that you can take the radiator support off and come out the front side. So I think that's what I'm going to try. You know, it's just 4 bolts that connect this to the body. So 2 here, 2 here, and we need to disconnect the hood latch assembly, and then you've got 1 cable retainer for the hood latch cable, and then this whole thing should come out, and that hopefully will give us the room we need to get in here and work. Now there are a couple of, looks like 10mm bolts, if you can see this, on the back side of the fan housing to connect to the condenser. I think there's one there. This is going to be tricky to see. There's another. You can see my finger. There's another right back there, pretty much opposite the one on the driver's side. So getting to those is going to be tricky. But let me start with the refrigerant lines, and then we'll take this support bracket off and see where we are. Okay, I've got those refrigerant lines removed. See, this one's removed and completely taken out of the vehicle. So to get the radiator support bracket off, there's 2 10mm bolts here that hold the hood latch assembly. I've already popped this little retaining clip out for the cable. There's 2 13mm bolts here, 2 on the passenger side, and then there's also a 10mm right here that holds the radiator. So we're going to remove that, and that whole support arm should come out, and we will see where to go from there. Alright, I've got the radiator support bracket totally loose now. I also forgot to mention that obviously you need to also remove the 10mm bolt, not just from the radiator here, but from the condenser and fan housing here. So those are all removed, and the bracket is loose. So I can remove that from the vehicle and set it aside. Now we can work on the condenser and fan housing. So let me do some more digging here, figure out how many bolts there are, and we'll get it out of here. Alright, so I think my plan of attack here is going to be to free the fan from the vehicle so I can rock it forward and get out that 10mm bolt on this side. So what I'm going to do is, there's a 13mm bolt here I've mostly loosened. I'm going to finish removing that. And then there's this 10mm bolt here. I've loosened that. I'm going to finish removing that. That should allow me to pick up this as a unit and kind of get it up and lean it forward so I can get to both sides to pull those bolts out of the side, and hopefully that'll free the condenser from the fan housing. So let me try that and see if I have any luck. Alright, that worked really well. I was able to just simply, with those bolts removed, lift up and kind of twist sideways. Now the only thing tethering this into the vehicle is the wiring connection there. So there's a clip that we got to remove, the connector, and then there's a retaining clip on the wiring itself that I need to pop loose. And then I think it'd be easier if I just get the whole housing, fan housing, out of the vehicle, and I can carefully work on removing all the mounting bolts. It looks like there's 4 10mm, one top and bottom on each side. So then I can lay that on my workbench and just put the new condenser in and put it back together. So let me get the wiring removed, and then we'll lay this on the bench. Okay, I have freed the condenser and the fan from the vehicle, and after doing so I realized that there is no need to remove this 13mm bolt right here. All that does is secure this mounting bracket here, which has a hole in it that receives that rubber mounting stud on the bottom of the fan housing. So they're not actually mechanically connected. That grommet just fits inside that hole. So you can leave that 13mm bolt and just lift straight up, and the whole thing will come out. So I'm going to lay this on the workbench now, finish removing the condenser, and then we'll put the new one in the fan housing. Alright, so to finish separating these two, we just need to remove the 4 10mm mounting bolts, 2 on each side. You can see I've already loosened them. I'm going to finish taking those apart, and then we should be able to kind of rock the condenser out of the fan housing. This part will be tricky. It's going to kind of have to come out, I think, in a rocking motion. But let me get the bolts out of the way, and then we'll figure that part out. Okay, I've got all of those 10mm bolts removed. The condenser was loose from the housing. We just kind of need to rock it. So I'm going to do this with one hand while I'm filming. You can see that piece down there is that I pointed to in the previous clip is what wants to hook. But if I can, once I set the camera down, I'll be able to use 2 hands to separate these, and then we can work on putting the new condenser into the housing. Okay, I've got my new condenser laid out next to my old condenser. You can see the new one comes with 4 new 10mm mounting bolts. It also comes with these studs that go in at the refrigerant line connections, which come with plugs in them. I think I'm going to transfer over the old mounting studs, because these actually have a like a Torx head on them, so you can remove them with a socket, specialized socket. Whereas the replacement studs aren't squared off or anything, so it'd be easier to use a socket to install these. So I'm going to transfer those over. I'll remove the new 10mm bolts, and then we'll get ready to put this in the housing. Alright, I've got the new condenser, I've got everything swapped over to the new condenser, and I've got it installed in the fan housing. It's ready to go back into the vehicle, but I think I'm going to wait until I'm reassembling everything to put this back in right now. So for now, I'm just going to set it off to the side and move on to the accumulator dryer next. Okay, so we're ready to remove the accumulator, which is this little canister here. Again, this serves a couple of purposes as I understand it. Probably most importantly, it will capture any moisture that is inside your AC system. But it also, I think, will accumulate any liquid refrigerant that's leaving the evaporator core. So as I mentioned earlier, it's always important to replace this. Anytime you open up your AC system, you want to go ahead and replace this. It's good insurance that you're not going to introduce a bunch of moisture into your freshly charged system. With that said, it's kind of tight back here, but we've got a couple of things we need to do. We need to disconnect the AC lines, which have these retaining clips on them, which should just push off like that. And then there is a special tool that you need to push up inside here to relieve the clamping pressure of this line around the end of this line. I'll show the tool in a second, but basically there's a little tiny spring, circular spring that runs around this collar, and it clamps tight over the end of this line. You need to insert the tool up into the joint and press up while you try to separate the lines at the same time. So I'll show that in a second. We're going to try to get this line disconnected. We've also got to disconnect this side here, and then there are 2, I believe they're 10mm bolts back in here. One there and one down below it. Man, it's dark. I think hopefully you can see back in the back where I'm pointing right there. We need to remove those in order to remove the accumulator. So first I'm going to free the refrigerant lines themselves. I'll show that special tool here in a second, and then we'll work on the mounting bolts. Alright, so here is the special tool that you need. They kind of come in different forms. Some of them have handles on them. This is just a cheap one, but basically it's split so that you can separate it and get it around the line, and then you want to insert it with the wider side away from the fitting. So in this case it would go like this, and it would just insert up like that. I'm going to go ahead and fit it over the line, and then I'll show how you're supposed to use it. Be right back. Alright, so I've got the tool inserted there. Again, it separates around the line so you can get it on. Now the idea is to push it up into the fitting while you also try to separate the lines at the same time, which is going to be a little bit tricky. I can't do it with one hand, unfortunately, but that's the idea. So I'm going to see if I can get this separated, then we'll move on to the one at the firewall. Be right back. Alright, I've got that line removed. I will say it took a good amount of force to get the tool inserted, and then I had to really work the line. I had to pull quite hard to get it out, and I also had to kind of twist it back and forth as I was pulling out, almost to the point where I was afraid I was going to break something, but I could tell it was slowly removing from the joint. You can see there's quite a bit of fitting that goes up inside that line. So you have to pull it out, at least an inch or so before they'll separate. Alright, so now I've realized that I'm really going to have to remove those mounting bolts in the back in order to be able to remove this line, because it's a rigid line. There's no flexible connection in it, so in order to pull out, I'm going to have the accumulator free from the vehicle so that I can kind of rotate it and pull towards the front of the vehicle. So I'm going to probably use a little closed-in, ratcheting closed-in 10mm wrench like this, so I can get back there and remove those 10mm bolts, because I don't think I might be able to get a socket on this top one, but I don't know if I can get a socket on the bottom one. If I did, I'd probably only be able to make like 1/8 of a turn at a time. Hopefully with this, I'll have more room to work. So that's my plan. Let me see how that goes. Okay, I've got the mounting bolts disconnected for the accumulator. You can see it's free from the bracket, and that little ratcheting closed-in wrench was the trick. Honestly, I'm not sure how else you would get those out of there. I mean, I guess if you had a little teeny socket, it would work, but there's just so little clearance down there between I think those are the heater core lines and the side of the bracket. So the wrench I had worked great. So I've got it free, and you can see I have removed the retaining clip on this refrigerant line connection here, and I've already inserted that tool. Now this one, the spring connector is here, so you need the tool facing you, and you're gonna have to pull it towards you while you twist and pull on the accumulator. Once again, unfortunately I won't be able to film that because I need both hands in it. It's just super tight back there. But that's the idea. This is probably not going to be a whole lot of fun, but I'm going to see if I can get it removed. Then we can work on this line, which has a connection there, and the other connection is here behind where the air filter housing was mounted before. And then we're actually going to replace, or I'm going to replace this line. This came with the kit that I bought. Alright, so let me see if I can get the accumulator out of here and make some progress. Alright folks, well, I finally got the accumulator out of the way. You can see it right here. But I'm going to be totally honest, that was a complete nightmare. I'm not sure if I was just doing something wrong, or if my cheap tool just wasn't doing the trick on relieving the spring tension in the coupling, but for whatever reason I struggled with this forever. I ended up actually going ahead and removing the wheel well liner completely so that I could sit here and put my feet down on top of the shock tower and the tire so I could get leverage to yank on this thing. I really hope I didn't mess up the evaporator core, because I feel like I had to pull with all the strength that I had to separate the accumulator from the line coming out of the evaporator. So we'll see if I can pull a good vacuum on it later to test it. But I guess on to this line now. And before I deal with that coupling back there, I think I'm actually going to try to separate this one here so that when I do the one in the back, I have some slack, because I'm going to have to pull that this way. So I'm hoping this connector, this coupling, is not nearly as difficult as the accumulator line, but we'll find out here in a second. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this retainer clip and insert the tool. This is a different size line. I forgot to mention the lines back here require a 3/4 inch disconnect tool. This one looks smaller, it might be 3/8 or 1/2 inch. I'll figure that out here in a second, and I'll include that in the next segment. Be right back. Okay, thankfully that line came disconnected a whole lot easier. I ended up loosening the front line from these retaining clips. It's just kind of spread apart like that. There's one there. There's another here down below the radiator and transcooler, and another one beside that. So there's 3 of those. And that kind of releases this line from anything that's holding it, which allowed me to pull it forward as I worked on this connector here. So that line's loose. We'll reinstall that later. But that allows me to free up this line to pull forward back at the connection back there by the firewall. So I'm going to slip the tool onto that one and see if I can't get that one off. For this fitting, I ended up using a little bit of silicone lubricant before I put the tool on there. I don't know if that's what made it easier, or if the coupling just wasn't nearly as tight, but that one definitely went easier. Of course, I had better leverage on it too, but I'm going to try the silicone back there too, see if that helps. Be right back. Alright, the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to flush the evaporator core with AC flush. The instructions that came with my kit recommend this, and I think it's good practice, especially since the line that we just removed from this outlet, or sorry, inlet, I guess it is, looked like it had little aluminum shards on the inside, maybe from the compressor failure. So I want to try to get any of that stuff out of the evaporator core. To do that, I have a kit that I purchased just for this reason. I actually ordered this on Amazon, but it's a canister that has a connection to your air compressor. So air coming in from the compressor in the red hose. This was a hose I owned, but the kit came with this shut-off valve. I had to install my own adapter here to meet my match my hose size, but it's got a shut-off valve. Comes with a hook so you can hang it off something. The canister and the fittings here, and the hose, yellow hose, which goes to a spray nozzle that they send you, along with a rubber adapter on the end that you can wedge into the refrigerant line. It did not come with any flush, so I ordered this from my local parts store. This is a quart size. Hopefully that's enough to do the evaporator core and all the lines that I'm going to reuse. I don't have to do the condenser really because it's brand new, but I do want to do the lines. So essentially you would fill the canister with the flush and then connect the air hose and pressurize the system, and then you would stick the nozzle up into the refrigerant line like that and blow air. And you can see I've got a hose over the outlet pipe right there. This is an old radiator hose that I had laying around, and I have that routed down into an old oil container, and I shoved a bolt in the edge here just to provide an air gap so it can vent, so it doesn't pressurize the container. So I've blown some compressed air through it just to make sure it had good flow. Seems like it does, so I'm going to go ahead and depressurize the system now, fill my canister with the flush solution, and then I'm going to run that through the evaporator core until I feel like I flushed it out well, and then I'll take the lines that I'm going to reuse and flush them out as well in the same way. and I'll flush them into the same container. So I'm going to do that now. I just wanted to mention that. I think it's a good practice. You know, I think I spent 40 bucks on the kit and then maybe 12 or 14 on the flush. So it's not cheap, but you know, if you're going to all this trouble, you want to do a good job, and you don't want to leave contaminants and debris in your AC lines, because if you do, you're probably going to be doing this again real soon. So anyway, I just wanted to mention this process. I'm going to go ahead and take care of this, and then we'll move on to reinstalling everything.